Welcome to Spooky History. In this episode, we're heading deeper underground to explore Vivisepulture, or being buried alive. I'm going to start off this episode of Spooky History with a sincere content warning from the writer. I won't apologise for beginning this way, because of all the episodes yet written, this is the one I've been deliberately putting off for a long time. Because the fact is, for all the ghost stories, legends and unexplained phenomena history throws at us, some things in reality are so terrifying they'll trigger your deepest, most primitive fears worse than any spirit or beast. It was not much fun writing this episode. In fact, I needed a hug afterwards. And she's a horror author. Okay, here goes. Unless the scientists roll out immortality packages in my lifetime, let's all agree that one way or another we're all going to die someday. Yes? Alright? But ask most people how they'd prefer to die, and you'll usually get the same answer. In bed, surrounded by loved ones, in your sleep. You've lived your good long life, you've said your final goodbyes to everyone, you're closing your eyes and gently slipping away, quiet, peaceful, finito. Nobody expects to suddenly open their eyes again in the pitch black, completely alone. It's cold, blinking. Why is it so dark? You squirm, trying to turn over, you can't, cramped. Why? Hello? You listen. No sound. None but your own breathing, which is abnormally loud. As if each breath itself echoes, cloaks, and wants to smother you. This pitch blackness contains a feeling of claustrophobia you can't explain. Then you feel about. Wood. Smooth. Above, left, right. Your mind floods with denial. No, it can't possibly be. It's the 21st century. This doesn't happen to people anymore. This sort of thing could never possibly be happening to me. I'm mistaken. I lived a normal life. It can't end this way. It wouldn't. But then you notice that new sound is already your nails scratching frantically, instinctively, against your wooden cocoon. Oh God! You call out. No one answers. Then you realise your chest is heaving higher and higher with each gasp, with each cry. No one wants to die this way. Accidental cases aside, historically, it wasn't one of the severest execution methods for nothing. Whether as legal punishment, during war times, or through organised crime. Roman historian Tacitus wrote that in ancient Germany, you could be strapped to wicker and buried face down in the mud for petty crimes of infamy. Medieval England for sodomy, bestiality, and collusion with the Jewish community. Ancient Persia, Herodotus says it was a Persian custom associated with pleasing the gods. Ancient Rome, immumorant, aka being bricked up behind a wall, as with a Vestal Virgin who broke her celibacy laws, as well as numerous saints such as Saint Vitalis. Throughout medieval Europe, alarmingly, it was not an infrequent punishment for crimes perpetrated by women, e.g. thievery, adultery, murder, heresy, and infanticide. But for me, it's the unintentional cases that hardly bear thinking of, let alone writing about. Why? Well, here are a few examples, paying particular attention to the chronology as we get closer and even closer to more recent times, unfathomably close, uncomfortably close. Let's summarise the obvious first. With premature burial, asphyxiation would typically finish you off, or if, for example, you're trapped under a given structure, but here happens to be enough air, dehydration, starvation, or hypothermia get you sooner. Some folklorists and historians argue that premature burial is rarer than feared, especially before the early stages of decomposition were better understood by the modern medicine. Indeed, there are tales of corpses suddenly sitting upright with rigor mortis sets in, giving these poor medical students something to think about. Still, throughout human history, doctors, undertakers, nurses, embalmers, and even grave robbers have been shocked when their actions seemingly reanimate a supposed corpse. And what about during medieval plague epidemics, when uneducated townsfolk who couldn't even afford a doctor wanted an apparent corpse out of the house as soon as possible? Just Looking dead was enough. Makes me wonder how many poor souls woke up to worse than just a hangover. But one need only glance at some real examples for an idea of the unimaginable hell such victims died in. In 1885, North Carolina, the body of a man named Jenkins in the New York Times was found twisted around, face down in the coffin, the interior of which was covered in scratch marks. He'd literally ripped his hair out. Ontario, Canada, 1886. The Times reported a girl by the name of Collins found with her knees tucked up and her burial shroud torn to shreds. 2014. Children are playing near a graveyard in Macedonia, Greece. They hear screaming, but they see no one. Following the screams, to their horror, the noise directs their ears downwards, to the soil beneath their feet. By the time the authorities get there, it's too late. The woman was only 45 years old. Days earlier, a private hospital had declared her clinically dead. Only a year later, an almost identical incident occurred to another woman in her 40s, again in Macedonia. She was a cancer patient erroneously declared dead due to an adverse reaction of her cancer medication. Her own family heard her screaming underneath the ground only just after the burial, but again it was too late. Mental note: try not to die or go to hospital in Macedonia. It isn't as if well-meaning folk never attempted to prevent such a dreadful fate either. In the 7th century, Emperor Heraclius left specific instructions that his Prokenesian marble sarcophagus, a lot of words to say 5 times fast, remain open for no less than 3 days after he was interred, lest he suffered the same tragedy that allegedly befell Emperor Zeno, who was rumoured to be buried alive. In 1791, dissenting minister Robert Robinson likewise left instructions that his family pay regular visits to his grave just to be sure he was really dead, and that a watchman repeatedly checked the mausoleum door, and that his coffin have a shiftable glass pane too. He didn't wake up again, by the way. Since the 1890s, families who could afford it have built vaults with internal hatches, plentiful air circulation, and even padded walls to prevent poor soul harming themselves. And personally, I don't think leaving a little apology note would have gone amiss either. I don't know about you, but if I had the money, I'd prepare myself a vault complete with coffee machine, DVD player, chocolate dispenser, a phone line, before letting anyone assume I was dead. Thank you very much. In 1896, a London Association for the Prevention of Premature Burial was founded. No bad thing if you ask me. The idea was to ensure a qualified physician give a finals check to supposedly deceased bodies to be absolutely certain they were dead. The association itself campaigned for the use of, my personal favourite, safety coffins. Multiple designs for these intentional life-saving devices were patented during the 1700s and 1800s, and particularly with cholera epidemics during the 19th century when fears of premature burial peaked. Even Edgar Allan Poe got caught up in the subject with the publication of his short tale, The Premature Burial, in 1844. In 1792, the Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick was taking no chances. He ordered the construction of his coffin to include a window, a breathing tube, and a lock for his coffin lid, and the tomb door, the keys for which were placed with his death shroud. In 1798, German priest P.G. Pesler made the less practical suggestion that all coffins be connected to the church bells via tube and cord. Dafter yet, his pastor associate proposed literally sniffing the coffin interiors, taking deep breaths of the corpses on a delay basis to be sure they were definitely putrefying. Nothing gross about that. The 1820s saw a burst of ideas including portable death chambers, another German design by which the body is placed in a small chamber containing a signal bell and viewing window for watchmen to keep check. If no signs of life were evident after X number of days, the coffin was dropped through the floor into its grave and the chamber above reused. In 1822, Dr. Gutsmuth not only designed his very own safety coffin, but demonstrated its efficacy by being voluntarily buried alive for some hours, during which he even enjoyed a hearty meal via feeding tube from above ground. One of the most efficient systems was designed in 1829 by Dr. Johann Gottfried. Similar to previous designs, it employed strings connecting the corpse's hands and feet to bells above ground for alerting cemetery attendants, but it also used netting to prevent insects entering the coffin, housed the bell to prevent accidental ringing, and stopped rainwater falling down the tube. The most recent safety coffin was patented in 1995. Here you've got your own intercom system, alarm, torchlight, breathing kit and heart monitor. The fear of being buried alive, taphophobia, is still very real. So why aren't we seeing all those safety coffin designs being rolled out at bargain prices from your local co-op funeral directors? Two main reasons. 1. Despite designs galore, there have so far been 0 recorded cases of anyone ever being rescued from Vivisepulture in a safety coffin, forcing manufacturers to reconsider if it's even worth the money when you're supposed to have perfectly good doctors at hand to save them the trouble. 2. The problem with all those tubes and strings connecting the corpse to bells was false alarms caused by the decaying body. It naturally swells and sets them off, rendering the whole device unreliable. But was premature burial always simply a case of doctors screwing up? There is some cases where it may be something else at work. A bizarre and very rare occurrence known as Lazarus Syndrome. The patient is pronounced clinically dead following failed resuscitation efforts. Then, minutes to hours later, their heartbeat spontaneously returns without any assistance. Some make a full recovery, whereas with others it doesn't seem to last long and they die hours or even months later. Even more alarming is there have so far been at least 38 cases recorded since the 1980s. As recently as August 2020, 20-year-old Timisha Beacham was pronounced dead after 30 minutes of resuscitation efforts by paramedics. A doctor, who apparently hadn't even examined the body, confirmed her death. Standard procedure commenced. An hour later, her body arrived at a funeral home in Detroit, and the morticians unzipped the body bag and her eyes opened. She was literally just about to be embalmed. According to the family's lawyer, they would have begun draining her blood, to be very, very frank about it. Imagine, equally concerning, is the patient in question was African American. Now, I truly hope that's just coincidence, but considering racism is hardly unheard of, this raises some very grim, very disturbing questions indeed, particularly for patients of colour, minorities and/or without insurance. Timisha survived just 2 months more before passing away. Again in 2020, 81-year-old Russian grandmother Zineda Kononova was pronounced dead after doctors spent half an hour trying to revive her from surgery. 7 hours later, morgue staff were shocked to find the old lady lying on the floor in great distress, but awake and breathing. But the longest recorded incidence of Lazarus Syndrome belongs with the 2008 case of Velma Thomas from West Virginia, who was apparently dead for no less than 17 hours. Extraordinarily, rigor mortis had set in. Her son said her skin had already started hardening, her hands and toes were curling up, they were already drawn. Incredibly, she not only woke up after being taken off life support, but she also made a full recovery. It begs the question, doesn't it? Many questions, in fact. It makes me wonder how many similar patients throughout history were not so lucky. What? You're not as freaked out as I am? Are you sure? What makes you so confident it can't happen to you? Or someone you know? Or hasn't already? Because if you take nothing else away from this episode, do not forget the most terrifying thing of all, that all these cases of premature burial are just the ones we know about. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Spooky History. You can follow us on most social media at Spooky Hist Show and support us with donations at paypal.me/noisyghostend. If you have ideas for future episodes, just leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and please, do have nightmares. I'm sure after that episode, you will. Goodbye.